Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a different kind of story. Not a radiant legend, but something murkier, caked in mud, rusted through, and faintly smelling of old sweat trapped inside iron armor. There are no dragons here, no glorious night skies torn open by shining swords or shouts of honor, just a sore back, calloused hands, and the heavy silence of a life built on duty, not choice. You won't start with a sword, you'll start with a damp cloth, cold water, and eyes, still wet from crying, learning how to look down before you ever learn to look ahead. They say becoming a knight is glorious, but in a world this soggy and cold, glory's just a thin layer of shine, and shine peels fast. If this kind of storytelling makes you feel calm, or maybe just a bit sleepy, don't fight it. Let the voice pull you under, one slow rhythm at a time. And if you feel like it, leave a message. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. It's nice to know someone else is drifting off too, on a road paved with stones and saddle sores. Turn off the lights. Let your imagination spark something behind the cold stone walls. And let's begin with the journey to become a knight. You're standing in the shadow of the porch, feet pressed against ground that feels less like soil and more like rusted iron. The cloak your father draped over your shoulders doesn't fit, doesn't warm. It smells faintly of wood smoke, the kind that stings your nose and makes you blink without meaning to. The morning wind comes crawling across the fields, whispering something like, "Well then, it's time." Your father doesn't speak. He places a rough hand on your shoulder, thumb trembling slightly, like even he's not convinced this is the right thing. Your mother doesn't come out. She's either doing the dishes or she's busy not looking at you. Possibly both. You turn to say something, anything, but realize there's no sentence that fits the moment when you're 7 and about to be sent off like a forgotten package of butter. So you say nothing. They say nothing too. Behind you, the cart creaks. The ropes are already tied, securing a burlap sack that contains 2 stone-hard barley cakes and a pair of socks with more stitches than wool. You climb in without knowing where it's going, only that it won't be coming back. You don't cry, not because you're brave, but because crying usually needs a reason. And you haven't quite figured out what's happening yet. The wind brushes your cheeks like a dull knife. The cloak scrapes against your ankles, too short to keep you warm, too long to walk without tripping. You pull it closer anyway, as if it might shield you from the feeling of being misplaced. On the road to the castle, you ask no questions. The driver doesn't invite conversation, nor does he resemble the kindly old man from fairy tales. He yawns more than he speaks, and you're not sure if he has any teeth. You remember every bump that made the cart jolt, like each one knocked a piece of memory loose. Each sway made you wonder, if I fall off, would anyone come back for me? No one answers, not even the voice inside your head. The castle appears not like a beacon of hope, but like a bruise on the grey sky. It doesn't shine, it doesn't awe, it's just a pile of rocks, inhabited rocks. And somehow you're part of that pile now. The wooden gate creaks open with the sound of a starving stomach. No welcoming party, no music, no tray of fruits like in your storybooks. Just a woman in a brown dress, forehead wrinkled like a poorly folded sheet. She glances at you and mutters, "Another one?" You're led down a hallway that smells like damp stone and the remains of an unfinished fire. Your feet get wet from puddles on the cold floor, as if the castle itself hasn't decided whether to allow winter in yet. Each step shrinks you a little more. The sleeping quarters don't have beds, just straw, piled in a corner with 4 other boys, all of them asleep like they've long made peace with being forgotten. You don't know where to put yourself, so you just sit, like a button that fell off the wrong shirt. No one asks your name. No one offers theirs. Maybe they forgot them too. You hug your sack and look at the ceiling, where beams of wood grow moss and exhale in the fading light. You think of home, then stop. That thought doesn't help. It only makes your barley cake smell damper. The darkness comes not with sunset, but with the absence of lamps. Someone snores. Someone dreams and calls for their mother. No one answers. You lie down, trying not to make a sound. Your head rests on the bag. You feel a lump near the corner. Maybe it's bread. Maybe it's a rock. Hard to say which would be worse. The cold creeps in not through the wind, but through the silence. The kind where no one notices if you're cold. You overhear 2 boys whisper something about being punished again tomorrow. You don't know what for, but you have a feeling you'll find out soon enough. You don't sleep deeply. You dream of a feast, then wake up to boots pounding on stone and shouting. Then silence, and somehow you realize you haven't hit the bottom of strange just yet. The next morning, someone yanks your sleeve. No good morning, just a flat up and a finger pointing toward the courtyard, where mist hovers like a quiet suspicion. You don't ask questions, you're already learning. Not because you want to, but because those who don't learn quickly tend not to stay long. Before leaving the room, you look back at the pile of straw. It isn't a bed, but it's the first place you weren't told to leave. You nod at it, as if it's the only thing in the world that still deserves manners. You step into the yard, and for the first time you understand the cold isn't in the wind, it's in the fact that no one cares whether you feel it. This isn't a magical kingdom with brave knights and golden dragons. It's a quiet factory, where childhoods are ground down into obedience. You once imagined your first day at the castle would come with wooden swords, polished armor, and someone smiling as they said, "Welcome." There is no sword, there is no armor, just a broom, a bucket, and horse manure, a generous helping of it. You're taken to the stables before the sky has made up its mind whether it wants to be morning. No explanation, just a shovel with a cracked handle. An old soldier eyes you like you've already disappointed him and you haven't even exhaled yet. You hold the shovel awkwardly. Before you can ask anything, a shout cuts through. Hands are for scooping, not hugging. You scoop, slowly, then quickly, then upwind, and learn the hard way to keep your mouth shut when the dust kicks up. No one teaches you, just sighs and short, frayed versions of curse words that sound more like coughing. You don't see any swords, but you do see a frayed saddle, mouldy reins, and a horse whose judgmental stare rivals that of any bishop. You clean its hooves. It kicks over the water bucket. You're soaked from the knees down, and that's still not the worst part of the day. Your hands, which used to be as soft as overcooked porridge, are now beginning to split at the fingertips. Not from the cold, but from the soap, which appears to be made of ash, salt, and pure indifference. Each scrape smells faintly of dirt, dung, and whatever cruelty was stirred into the cleaning water. The old soldier doesn't tell you his name, you don't ask. In this place, asking questions earns you more chores. He calls you small hands. That seems to be your official title for the week. When the work ends, you're given a piece of bread. It's as hard as flagstones. You chew less and swallow more. Your teeth are still baby teeth, the bread is not. Every gulp is a gamble, and the water that follows tastes like someone stored it in an old boot. There's no bell for lunch, no break, just to shout, "Hey!" It's your turn. You never know what for until your hand ends up holding a rag in the dining hall, or worse, in the latrine. Once you polished a knight's boots, he said, nice and clean, then wiped them on your trousers. You nodded. That was better than being yelled at. You learn quickly, this castle doesn't reward kindness, it punishes forgetfulness. You are not important, and you're never supposed to think you might be. Another boy, whose name you've already forgotten, broke a silver goblet. He was made to scrub the floor with a toothbrush until his fingers bled. The goblet was replaced. The boy wasn't. Someone else showed up in his place. You begin to understand. Everything here can be replaced except mistakes. Mistakes get remembered. You start avoiding errors. Not from fear, but from a quiet desire to last more than a week. When guests arrive, you're taught to step back 3 paces, bow, and never make eye contact. Looking directly at nobles might be seen as rudeness. Or worse, might get you assigned a task. Tasks usually mean tired, or filthy, or both. Once, they called you into the courtyard to stand still and look presentable, which meant holding a towel for 30 minutes without twitching. You discover that sore legs have a rhythm, and if you follow it, you don't collapse. Falling isn't failure. Falling is a reason to be scolded. Being scolded is a reason to skip dessert. And dessert, which may be a sliver of week-old apple tart, still feels like a dream that doesn't belong to you. At night, you sit near the fireplace. Not too close. That space belongs to the boys who've survived longer. You listen to the others. Someone had to scoop a dead rat. Someone else had a horse chew through his sleeve. You don't say much. Just smile a little. Silence is the safest way to feel anything like joy. Your hands start peeling. Your palms redden like sunburned skin. Only it's not the sun, it's just the work, the days, and the quiet erosion of comfort. You try to count the days, but after a week, they all taste the same, like porridge with no salt. No one really laughs, not with their whole face, just quick little grins. Enough to stay alive, but not enough to believe in hope. You learn that too. When it rains, you gather wet firewood. When it's hot, you drag a barrel of water across a courtyard made of oven stones. The weather always has a reason for you to be dirtier than the day before. Once the old soldier muttered, "Don't expect anyone to be kind to you here." He didn't look at you when he said it. Maybe he wasn't even talking to you. Maybe he was just remembering. You go to sleep with aching hands, sore feet, and a ringing in your ear from someone yelling too close. You dream of home, but the door stays closed. You reach for your father's hand. You don't reach far enough. The next morning, you wake before anyone calls. Not because you're eager, but because those who sleep in get called names that aren't theirs. You don't want to be called lazy. You already have a name here. Small hands. No one here needs you to be ready, just present and quiet and careful not to break anything except your own sense of dignity. You think you woke early, but really, the day had started long before you even noticed. No one asks if you want to start the day. The day starts without permission, with someone yelling at someone else and the faint, sour scent of feet that never got washed the night before. You open your eyes because it's bright, not because you're rested. You sit up and your head still throbs from where you bumped it on a beam yesterday. No one noticed. No one ever does. Unless you block their path or drop something. You slip on your shoes. They don't belong to you. They once belonged to a boy with bigger feet, then smaller feet, or maybe a boy who's no longer around. Your toes swim inside like fish trapped in a wooden bucket. Each step teaches you a lesson about balance and about pain. You run not because you're in a hurry, but because if you walk too slowly, someone will speed you up with a shove. You learn to run quietly, to breathe without noise, and to never let anyone see you sweat. The chores repeat. Scrub the floors, haul the water, clean up someone else's chicken bones after someone else's feast. You move from kitchen to stable, from stable to courtyard. No one remembers seeing you, even if you were just there. They don't use your name. Some call you hey, others say again. Most just point and hope you understand. You do, quickly, not because you're clever, but because your memory is trained by wooden spoons smacking the back of your neck. Your hands are calloused now, not all at once, just layer by layer, a quiet reminder that you've stayed here long enough to become a tool. And tools don't need to be ready, they just need not to break. The castle is big, you still think so because you still get lost. Or maybe you're not lost, maybe you're just somewhere you're not supposed to be. Once you walked into a noble meeting by mistake. You froze. One person glanced at you, raised an eyebrow slightly, and then continued the conversation. You backed out. You weren't called back. So maybe you did it right. Another time, you cleaned the same hallway 3 times, not because it was dirty, but because 3 different people told you to. You didn't argue. You cleaned it again. By the 3rd round, the floor was shinier. And your back stiffer. No one thanked you, not even the floor. You get good at vanishing. There's an art to not being where someone's looking for someone to boss around. You learn to pass through doorways slowly, pretending you're headed somewhere important. Even if you're never assigned anything important. You eat standing up. Not because there's no chair, but because sitting invites risk. Someone might call you lazy, and lazy people don't get second helpings. At night, you sleep without dreaming. Not because you have no dream, but because they can't fight through the aches and the straw dust. If you do dream, you usually wake up from the smell of mold, not from any happy ending. Once you wanted to ask, "Am I doing well?" But that question got stuck in your throat between a coughing fit from dusty rags and the sound of a kicked door too close to your ears. Eventually you stop asking. No one else asks you either. No one asks if you're hurt. No one asks if you're tired or if you're okay. They only ask, "Is it done yet?" You nod, always nod, even when you don't know what you're agreeing to. Nodding is easier than speaking, easier than refusing, easier than being. You start to think you've gotten used to this. Used to not being remembered, not being called, not being needed. You become part of the background. Not pretty, but good enough to hang a flag on. You live like footsteps on stone, always echoing but never remembered. One day, you catch your reflection in a dull bronze mirror. It takes a few seconds to realize it's you. Your face is thinner, your eyes deeper, but your mouth still doesn't know how to smile. Time doesn't move here. It loops. Each day is yesterday, just with a new bruise and a different kind of soreness. You mark days not by calendars, but by fresh scrapes and slightly newer rags. You learn to live without asking, without expecting kindness, without expecting to be seen. You don't learn goodness, you learn to stay out of the way. One day, a new boy arrives, a year younger than you, but older somehow in the way he looks at things. He asks, "When do we get to hold a sword?" You don't answer. You hand him a rag, not because you're bitter, but because that's the gentlest truth you've got. You asked the same question once. You got an answer in bruises, and more bruises after that. Because before you learn to fight, you learn to wipe up other people's blood, and to bow at just the right moment. When someone misses your face but not their shout, you learn to scrub floors before you ever touch a sword. Not because flaws are more important than enemies, but because flaws are real. Enemies are still out there, somewhere in a song you were never allowed to finish hearing. And when the floor is dirty, you get yelled at. When there's war, no one's calling your name yet. The broom isn't light, it's long, stiff, it's straw, twisted by someone who clearly wasn't feeling generous that day. And the wooden handle always seems to splinter in exactly the spot where your hand has to go. Sweeping the floor feels like fighting sand. You never win, you just get slower until you stop reacting at all. You begin to notice kinds of dirty. There's mud. There's the wet footprints of someone who didn't care. There's dried blood that no one asks about. The worst is holiday stew, spilled and forgotten for 3 days. By then, it's a new life form. The rag isn't really cloth, it's old shirts, discarded towels, or worse, a tunic from someone who never came back. It smells like sweat, mildew, and hope that didn't rinse clean. When you kneel to wipe the stones, you discover a different world. One of cracked tiles, moss in corners, and boots that never slow down just because you're there. You learn to pull your hand back at just the right time, unless you enjoy being stepped on. The sound of boots becomes more familiar than your own name. They arrive with rhythm, leave in anger, and sometimes double back, just to make sure you heard them. No one teaches you how to read a mood from footsteps. You pick it up on your own. The stone floor is colder than you expected. Even in summer, it keeps winter tucked beneath it like a secret it won't give up. If you kneel too long, your knees go wooden. Not strong, just damp, swollen, and one bad look away from breaking. You don't hold a sword. You hold a bucket. And silence. Silence is the only thing you can keep without someone trying to take it back. Once, your hand slipped. You spilled the bucket right before a ceremony. You didn't explain, you just wiped it up. Faster, deeper, quieter. No one thanked you, but no one noticed either. That counts as a win. You eat with your hands. Not because spoons don't exist, but because asking for one earns you a lecture about expectations. The bread is as hard as holiday stonework. It crumbles, crumbs fall. And when crumbs fall, you clean them. You begin to live among 3 companions, the smell of damp, the sound of boots, and the crunch of old bread. They don't sing, they don't tell stories, but they have their own rhythm. You listen to them the way you'd listen to a heartbeat, if that heartbeat belonged to something larger than you, and colder. One day, your roommate mutters, "I wish I could hold a sword." You nod, but in your mind you think, swords are sharp. Brooms don't get days off. People say, cleaning teaches humility. You don't know what humility is, but you do know that cleaning helps you avoid being called lazy. And in the castle, that's as close to a reward as it gets. You find parts of the floor that never come clean. Not because you're bad at it, but because the dirt got there before you did. Some stains are older than you, smears, scuffs, dried blotches of something no one names. You learn to let them stay and not to ask. You begin holding the rag like it matters. Not because you like it, but because it's the only thing that doesn't hit back. You still believe you'll hold a sword. Someday. But not today. People walk past you, talking about politics, about parties, about the tear in someone's sleeve, and they never look down. You're there. You hear everything, but you're not allowed to remember. You witness without being allowed to be a witness. Silence becomes your second skin. You put it on each morning. It never needs washing. It just gets heavier with time. You know when rain's coming because the floor gets slick before the boots track it in. You know when there's been a funeral because people walk slower. You know when someone failed because the footprint they left is deeper than the rest. Your hands are so calloused now, you don't feel much. You don't notice when the rag tears. You only realize it when your skin touches cold stone directly. You don't complain. The stone doesn't listen, and the people don't ask. One afternoon, someone leaves a sword beside your rag. You glance at it, it's beautiful, polished, the handle wrapped in leather, and then you clean beneath it like it's just another table leg. You're not jealous, you're not sad, you just think, rags are easier to rinse than blood. That boy who got the sword before you, he was taller by a hand, but you're older by a winter, a broken finger, and 3 swollen knees. And you know now everyone learns how to fall, not to stand out, but so they fall without making trouble. One day you'll hold a sword, but before that you'll carry bruises, wow, more than you thought a body could hold. The first time you hold a wooden sword, it feels familiar. Mostly because it's shaped like the broom handle you've been dragging around for weeks, and honestly, you hold it the same way. Your hands already know how to grip something heavy, splintered, and slippery. The only difference now is that this time it hits back, and this time people clap for it. You're not called a warrior, you're called that one, then the one who slipped, and later, the one who stayed down too long. Your title changes with each new bruise. Wooden swords aren't sharp, but they don't need to be. Not when they're swung by someone a head taller, 2 meals heavier, and very unhappy about being paired with the new one. You don't see your injuries, you hear them, in your bones, in your muscles, in the high-pitched whistle your body makes when you try to stand up. Each fall teaches you something, mostly how not to fall worse. No one teaches that. You figure it out after deciding the floor is less painful when you land on your backside instead of your spine. Hands are better shields than faces. No one counts how many times you get hit. They only remember if you cry. And if you cry, you're weak. And weak is inconvenient. No one says you've got this. They just say again and get up. So you get up. Always. Even when your head is ringing like a frying pan that's been dropped from the second floor, you start recognizing bruises like a calendar. Purple is yesterday, yellow is 2 days ago, greenish, you're not sure, but definitely not today. They fade slower than your memory. Eventually you stop keeping track. You don't fight back, not because you're noble, but because you've done the math. And retaliating equals more hits. And you've got exactly one shoulder left that still works properly. Once, you fall flat on your back. Your breath leaves your lungs like someone just stole it. You open your mouth, but no air comes out. Just a noise, somewhere between a gasp and a broken cat squeal. The trainer says, again, no one teaches defense. They just tell you to stand straight and then hit you until you figure out how not to fall. It's a very traditional method and very repetitive. One of the older boys tells you not feeling anything is good. You can't tell if that's advice or just sarcasm that's been left out too long. Still you try. You practice not feeling, at least not in your face. You clench your teeth, not for toughness, but to stop the tears from sneaking out. Once you bite too hard, a tiny piece of your tooth snaps off. You don't tell anyone. It becomes your first secret in the castle. Your fingers swell, your wrist stiffens, your knees bleed, not from fighting, but from falling just wrong onto a stone corner. All of it is labeled training. You hear things like discipline builds character, and you think then character must be purple, sore, and slightly bruised. You don't say that aloud. Your lips are swollen. One day you land a hit. It's not clean, not strong, but enough to make the other boy stop. You expect praise. Instead, you get hit 3 more times. Apparently, no one likes when the new one messes up the balance. You learn that survival means staying in the middle, not too good, not too weak, just somewhere in between, like a rag that no one bothers replacing because it still kind of works. That night, you lie in bed and can't turn over, not because you're sore, but because every attempt is a tiny war. You learn to sleep like stone, still and silent, because waking up hurts more than staying still. One day, someone hands you a cold cloth. No words, just the cloth. You don't know their name, but you remember the feeling, cold, damp, and for the first time that day, not alone. You're not holding a real sword. You're still holding wood, sweat, and what's left of your pride. You don't know how to strike, but you know how to dodge. You haven't won, but you've lost to yourself a little less than yesterday. And here, that's enough, because pain has a sound, but silence eats you from the inside. It doesn't bruise, it doesn't bleed. It's just the quiet sense that if you collapsed today, no one would ask why. You don't start the day with a greeting, you start with a bell ringing through fog. It isn't gentle, it doesn't invite, it repeats. Over and over, like someone banging their head against metal just to make sure you're awake. The chapel has no fire. Or maybe it does, but only when someone important dies. You haven't reached that level of importance. So you pray in the cold, not sure what you're praying for. Other than thicker socks, you kneel on stone. No mat, no cushion, just stone. And the kind of silence that even God doesn't seem interested in breaking. If you asked, "Are you cold up there?" you wouldn't hear an answer. But your knees would nod, your breath becomes mist. Mist has no smell, no shape, but it feels like a small damp hand patting your face each time you exhale. You try breathing less to conserve what little warmth you still have. Voices begin to sing, not yours. Your voice is too small or too hoarse, or both. You open your mouth and hope no one notices you're stifling a yawn. The boy to your left sings loudly. The one on your right doesn't sing at all, but glares at you every time you lean even slightly in his direction. There's enough room in the chapel for the word of God, but not quite enough for your elbows. Sometimes you nod off, not because you're lazy, but because your spine is filing a complaint. One nod, then another, and sleep comes. You wake up to a slap, not from God, God may forgive. The chapel guards do not. Your cheek stays warm long after the prayer ends. You try to think holy thoughts, but your mind is full of dry bread, fish bones caught in your throat, and that broom you forgot to rinse. You feel guilty. Then remember, guilt is probably the reason you're here in the first place. Someone reads a passage. Slow, monotone, almost soothing, if not for the cold. You don't remember the content, only the word endurance. It comes up a lot. You learn to kneel without going numb, or rather, to go numb without falling over. A useful skill both in and out of chapels. Each prayer is a quiet battle. You fight cold, hunger, sleep, and yourself. You don't know who wins, but you're always the one who leaves first. One morning, a child coughs. It echoes across the stone like a crack in a frozen pond. Everyone turns, not to help, just to make sure no one else dares follow. You used to think silence was peaceful, until you had to live in it. The silence in the chapel is like being locked inside your own head, with no door out. You wonder, does God hear all of this? If so, he must know you're cold, sleepy, and thinking about soup more than salvation. You hope he has a sense of humor. Once a candle goes out in the middle of a hymn. No one says anything. No one relights it. The dimness slips away, leaving behind pure black, as if God nodded off too. You want to believe someone hears your prayers, but you're not sure you said anything. You just mouthed the words, repeated them, and hoped sincerity might pass as warmth. Eventually, the guard taps the floor with his staff. That's the end. You rise. Your knees crack like an old gate in winter. You don't look around. Everyone's as tired as you. No one dares admit it. You leave the chapel feeling like you survived a snowstorm, one you forgot a coat for, one you forgot you ever had a coat for. No heat, no absolution, just onward. You tell yourself, or maybe tomorrow will be warmer. Then you remember, every day is cold, cold in your bones, cold in the greetings that never come. And to fight that cold, you eat. Or rather, you try to swallow something someone insists is a meal. Meals don't begin with blessings. They begin with a smack of hard bread hitting a wooden plate. No one says enjoy. No one says anything. There isn't time. And only a fool opens their mouth when they could be using it to chew. You learn to eat with urgency. Not because you're hungry, but because if you're slow, you'll end up with crumbs and the sound of someone else burping beside you. The bread isn't soft. It isn't chewy. It's durable. You use your teeth like chisels. Once you thought you'd bitten into bone, but it was just the edge of the crust that hadn't seen rain. Salted meat is a luxury, which means rare, tough, and saltier than the tears of a boy who just lost his portion. The meat is thin, thinner than morning motivation, and chewy like rope left out through 3 seasons. You chew and chew and chew, until you forget what it was you started chewing at all. You used to think eating was joy, until you had to use both hands to break off a bite-sized piece of bread. Once, it snapped back and hit your forehead. No one apologized, not even the bread. There is soup, sometimes. It's warm if you're at the front of the line. If not, it's warm-colored water with floating shapes you hope are vegetables. There are no spoons, only hands. You sip soup by tilting your bowl and pretending it's medicine. Each swallow feels like a gamble. Are you drinking broth, or whatever swam in it last? You learn to hold a mouthful just to pretend you're still eating, long after your food is gone. You chew leftovers again when you discover one last scrap stuck to the roof of your mouth. You think, a cracked tooth is a small price for nutrition. The meal ends faster than you'd like. No one chats. Except one old man mumbling about last year's harvest, even though you've never seen him hold a shovel. You suspect that talking is his way of eating less. He trades bites for words, and maybe memories. Festivals are different. Grilled meat, smoke from the fire, and the crackle of grease like tiny fireworks under a cold sky. Once you got a piece, bigger than your finger, and nearly cried. It had smell, it had taste, it didn't hurt your gums. You remember that bite like a dream. It's over, but the scent lingers. Long. Too long. Sometimes, deep in winter, you smell phantom bacon fat, and your heart warms, just a little. No one tells stories during meals, not because there's nothing to say, but because speaking means losing your turn. You learn that the hard way, first time you open your mouth too wide for a sentence and lost half your bread. You don't have a fork, but you don't need one. There's nothing to stab. A fork is a luxury, like dry gloves, or an afternoon without chores. You've seen the cook eat alone. His plate has colour, his food has steam. You watch, not from hunger, but curiosity, about a world where grease lives on sleeves, not in imagination. You don't resent the kitchen, you just think, if smelling could fill your belly, you'd have gained weight last month. But smells don't satisfy, they don't fill. They only expand the emptiness. You once wanted to be a kitchen boy, until you saw one get yelled at for dropping a piece of meat. No one picked it up, but everyone stared, and the look they gave was colder than chapel air before sunrise. Each night, your stomach isn't empty, just unfinished. You sleep with the feeling that someone's eaten a part of you and never told you what it was. Not the bread, but something between your stomach and your sense of hope. In the morning, you wake again to the bell, as if your empty belly is being summoned by name. You pray that today the bread will be softer, not tastier, just less stone-like. Because near the kitchens there is warmth, there is light, there are whispers, laughter, and sometimes people who vanish without a word. Stories from the kitchen are not often repeated, at least not by those who want to eat again.
You're not supposed to be near the kitchen fire. The hearth is for those who know how to stir, season, or stay quiet at the right time. You only know how to scrub, and scrubbing doesn't fill anyone's belly, but sometimes you sneak in, not out of hunger. Hunger is too common to be a reason anymore. You come for the sound of fire, the only thing in the castle that makes noise without scolding you. Fire has its own language. It doesn't shout like drill sergeants. It doesn't whisper like prayers. It crackles like it's telling secrets to the logs and you're just eavesdropping by accident. You sit by the wall, knees pulled close, cloak tucked over them like a stray cat trying to warm its bones. No one stops you, or maybe they pretend not to notice. The cook probably sees you, but he's old, and there are too many things he's learned not to see. Once you stole an apple. It wasn't big, wasn't red, just the kind that falls to the ground and nobody bothers picking up. But when you bit into it, it was so sweet you honestly thought you were dreaming. You hid the peel under the ashes, not out of fear, but because you didn't want anyone to know something sweet had ever existed here. Sweetness is dangerous. It makes you want more, and wanting makes you lose. The cook once joked with you, just once, something about how you'd scrubbed a pot so hard You peeled off the layer of burned stuff he was saving as traditional seasoning. You didn't laugh, but it felt like someone had slipped a warm coal inside your chest. Another time, a soldier, someone who'd never said more than 3 words to you, set a baked potato on the edge of the stove right in front of you. He didn't look at you. You didn't say anything. You just sat there, pretending to warm your hands, while the potato cooled gently in your lap. That moment, short as a flame licking a damp log, lasted longer than you expected. Long enough to remind you you were still here. Not just as a shadow, but as a person. Little bit. The kitchen has real smells, grease, burnt things, herbs. Sometimes comforting, sometimes nauseating, but never musty, never like your damp bed in the far corner. You like the smell of chicken fat, you've never eaten it, but you'd recognize it anywhere, like your name. People tell stories around the hearth, war stories, love stories, ghost stories. You're not invited to speak, but you listen, and you keep the stories. And later, when you can't sleep, you tell them back to yourself. There are stories you don't repeat, like the one about the boy who stole bread and disappeared. No one knew where he went. No one asked. Only the drawer where the bread was kept got nailed shut after that. You didn't ask either, not because you didn't want to know, but because you already knew too much. And in this castle, knowing too much usually means there's no one left to tell. Once, you saw the cook cry. Very briefly, like a tear was just a seasoning mistake. He turned away, kept stirring. Never brought it up again. Neither did you. The chapel freezes you solid, but the hearth melts you, quietly, into a shape you no longer recognize. You're not sure which you prefer. Sometimes you wish you could live by the fire forever. No battlefield, no swords, no polishing armor, just washing, peeling, and listening. But that dream smells like overcooked potato, warm but never quite enough. You sit there, hands open near the flame, as if they could thaw something you lost a long time ago. The smoke stings your eyes, but at least it's real, at least it's hot, at least it doesn't yell. And you think, if fire could talk, maybe it would tell you to go to bed before it burns out. And so do you, because tomorrow the light won't come from the hearth. It'll come from metal, cold, hard. And reflecting back a face you're no longer sure you recognize. You used to think becoming a knight meant riding a white horse, with flags flapping in the wind, songs sung in your honor, and a sword so heavy it took 2 hands, but never had to scrub a pot. You believed honor smelled like morning grass, that dragons might fly overhead if you prayed just right. But the day you were told to polish Sir Baldwin's boots, are the ones that always walk too fast past the stables, you learned something. Armor shines, yes, but mostly it reflects what's stuck to the souls. Horse manure never makes it into the songs, you noticed. The first suit of armor you touched wasn't for you. It was bulky, cold, and rattled like a bell that had forgotten its tune. You polished it with what they called a rag. Really just a shirt once worn by the boy before you. He's not here anymore. Every morning you hear steel hitting stone, not a sword drawn in triumph, just armor descending steps, loud and heavy. One day, while carrying a chest plate across the yard, you slipped in the mud. No one laughed, not even you. Once you tried on a helmet when no one was looking. It was too wide, too heavy. It smelled like 3 seasons of old sweat. You nearly suffocated, and when you took it off, your ears still rang. Not from glory, From oxygen loss, they still play songs about Roland on festival days. The lute rings like water over stone. But you're carrying soup, trying not to spill it. Someone sings about triumph. You think about the bruise on your thigh from hitting the water barrel yesterday. They talk a lot about honor. No one tells you how to hold it. You asked once. The answer, you'll understand when it's time, which means not today, not tomorrow, possibly never. You've heard the tale of Arthur beheading the dragon. The only dragon you've seen is the wheezing quartermaster. And if he ever breathes fire, it's probably from too much pepper. Armor makes noise when you touch it. Not the sound of valor, the sound of warning, careful. That's expensive. You clean it like it's made of glass. Because if you slip, someone's going to lose a hand, and it might be yours even if you weren't wearing it. Still, a small part of you, very small, believes that one day you might wear it, not to polish, but to stand tall, not as background during the parade, but at the front. That hope isn't loud, it's quiet, like the shadow you see each morning while scrubbing floors. It's long, vague, and never answers when you speak to it. You think maybe honor isn't light. Maybe it's the way you keep polishing someone else's armor without cursing every stain. Maybe glory is what others see, and all you see is cold metal. But still you keep scrubbing, because stopping would be colder. And if you ever looked up, you might catch Sir Baldwin's smug smile, which is colder than the armor. Each time the metal gleams, you see your reflection, small, warped, dim. You're not a knight, but you're near them, near enough to smell the battlefield, or unwashed socks, sometimes both. You never tell anyone that sometimes you still dream about dragons, not to slay, but to ride, or to curl up beside on a winter night like a giant cat that knows how to keep you warm. In the dream, its back is softer than straw, and it never asks what you've done to deserve comfort. It just breathes, slow, steady, enough for you to believe there's a place where people don't have to clench their way through survival. Then you wake, next to cold boots, and a day longer than the captain's sword. Dragons aren't real, but responsibility is. You're 14. They call that old enough. Not old enough to marry, not old enough to drink, but old enough to carry the burdens of someone more important than you. No one asks if you want this. They just give you a word, Squire. It sounds noble, like a rung on the ladder to glory, but the rung is slippery, smells like rusted iron, and twists your ankle if you step wrong. You learn this on day one, running after Sir Baldwin through 3 corridors, while carrying armor that weighs more than you do. You don't scrub floors anymore, you scrub people. Specifically the person who wore that armor all day, sweat-soaked, mud-streaked, and sometimes covered in things you don't want to identify. You carry a sword, not yours, and you're not allowed to drop it, not even once. If you stumble, the sword won't fall, but your place might. You learn how to buckle straps, adjust chin pieces, and keep your back straight even while bent at the waist. You learn to absorb shouting when a button's crooked, and to not blink when you're blamed for not predicting someone else's mood. You're not allowed to guess wrong, but you're also not allowed to ask. Each morning, you wake Sir Baldwin. Not with a bell, but by slowly opening the door and dodging the reflexive kick aimed at whatever soul dares interrupt sleep. You don't hold it against him. You just learn to stand slightly to the right. You follow him to training. You don't get to train, you carry things. When he swings, you count. When he falls, you catch. When he laughs, you try to look like you get the joke. Sometimes he tells stories about the battle at Grey Valley where he got injured from fighting too fiercely. The scar on his shoulder, he says, came from an honourable strike. You've seen the scar, it looks more like a bite. But you keep that to yourself. You grow familiar with the weight of armour, not because you wear it, but because you carry it, piece by piece, day by day. You learn what glory weighs, literally, and your back aches every morning to prove it. They don't call you floor scrubber anymore, now you're sword boy. Honestly, you miss the old name, it felt lighter. The new one comes with a whole new bag of bruises each time you stand too close when Sir Baldwin spins around. Your meals don't change. Except now, you eat slightly earlier because you need to be ready at the gate. You bite dry bread before it hits the dirt while you're running. That counts as an upgrade. At night, you polish boots, oil hinges, check saddle straps. You think this is the beginning of knighthood. Then you hear him snoring, steady, warm, and completely devoid of anything that smells like honor. You realize this isn't the summit. It's the basement of the ladder to glory. And you're in it with a bucket, a rag, and hands tougher than most compliments. No one told you that becoming a squire meant more work, more yelling, and less visibility. You're not a child anymore, but you're not anything else yet either. You're the space between, without a name, just a job. You try to remember why you're here. Maybe for the dream. Maybe because your father once gripped your shoulder and said nothing. Or maybe because you've been here so long you don't know where else to go. But this, at least, you know. You've learned not to groan when your back aches, not to answer back when scolded, and not to bleed outside your boots. Those aren't in the manuals, but they keep you alive. You're 14, and you're a squire. No cake, no pats on the back. Just someone asking you to bring out the saddle, even though it's still foggy and you're still hungry, but you're still standing. And after dinner, you still have the strength to lift a rag. That's a victory. The only one this week. Not the kind they write down in history, but the kind written in calluses. You used to think armor is what makes someone a knight. Shiny, imposing, heavy, untouchable. You weren't entirely wrong. It is all those things, except the shiny part. Because you are the one who's supposed to polish it. You learn that rust isn't just an inconvenience, it's a death sentence if it shows up in the right place. One jammed hinge, one snapped strap, and your master, Sir Baldwin, hits the ground like a sack of wet potatoes. No one blames the armor, they blame whoever cleaned it. You spend hours checking every clasp. Some screech like teeth grinding. Others make no sound at all because they're already broken. You replace straps, oil joints, scrape off mold with your fingernails when the blade dulls. The only thing sharp now is the smell, thick as morning fog and far less poetic. You didn't know a single human could leave that much behind inside a suit of armor. Sweat, dried blood, bits of grass, breadcrumbs, and once half a chicken bone. You don't ask, you just hold your water bucket and pretend you're cleaning a tool. Not something sacred, not a relic. The sword is the worst. Hard, straight, silent. You don't see fear in it, but you feel it when wiping off blood crusted down the spine. Sometimes it's still warm. You don't ask why. You use a coarse cloth soaked in vinegar, rubbing across every groove. The metallic stench creeps into your nose like someone crushing an insect inside your skull. You don't pinch your nose, you need your hands to hold the blade steady, and your nose to figure out if today's blood came from man or something else. You get used to small cuts on your thumb, usually when the cloth slips, sometimes when you're too tired to hold steady, and once, just once, because you thought you saw something looking back at you from the blade. Sir Baldwin says you're doing well, which means he doesn't yell, you take it as praise. The way a drowning man takes driftwood for a miracle. You hold on to it, not with your hands, they're busy scraping rust, but with your eyes. One day it rains, and someone left the armor outside. You find it hours later and quietly cry as you scrape red streaks off the neck piece. Not because you'll be punished, but because you know you'll be at it until dawn. You don't hate the armor. It doesn't love you either, it's just in between, like you. It has no soul but holds on to more than it should. Once you tried wearing a piece, just the arm, it was too heavy. You wonder how anyone could fight in this. Then you remember, not everyone fights to win. Some just wear it to die a little slower. You adjust the breastplate strap. You don't want it snapping while he's swinging. You don't want metal crashing to the ground while others are watching. And you really don't want to hear, "Who strapped this?" Over time you learn that metal has moods. Some days it rings like a trumpet. Some days it wheezes like lungs full of smoke. You're not sure if that's the weather or your hands trembling. You only know. Armor feels heavier when you're afraid. Each night you set it carefully next to Sir Baldwin's bed. Not because he asked, but because you'd rather not see it in your dreams. You've dreamed of wearing it, unable to take it off. And when you woke, you could still smell dried blood on your hands. You understand now, polishing armor isn't just about keeping it clean. It's about keeping its owner alive and keeping you alert in a world where everything weighs more than it should. Even silence, especially silence when it shows up before the screaming does. You thought you were ready. The armor was polished, the sword sharp. Sir Baldwin nodded. You retied the strap for the third time, not because it was loose, but because your hands wouldn't stop moving. No one called it fear, they just called it your first time. You weren't placed in the formation, you walked behind it, next to the spare horse and the water bags. You never touched the enemy, but the enemy came close, very close. The first sound wasn't a trumpet, it was someone retching. A young soldier emptying his stomach into the dirt. Then came metal, clashing, shrieking, and a scream that hit your chest like God, if God swung iron instead of mercy. It didn't sound like the songs, there was no brave shout of charge, just someone yelling run, cut off halfway, like a string snapping under tension. You didn't see dragons, no halos of glory. You saw a man's teeth fall from his mouth, still wet with spit. You tried not to look. But your feet had their own ideas. You saw Sir Baldwin swing, and the man on the receiving end didn't say a word, didn't get a name, didn't get a goodbye. Someone behind you shouted, "Duck," not at you. An arrow hit the tree beside your head. You knew it by the sound, like someone whistling through an empty stomach. You didn't duck, you froze. Then you exhaled and realized you hadn't breathed in over a minute. The smell of blood arrived uninvited and stayed too long. It wasn't nosebleed blood. It wasn't a scraped knee kind of scent.
It was heavier, richer, like metal forgotten in a latrine bucket. You lifted your sleeve to cover your nose, lowered it again. The sleeve was already soaked. You weren't wounded, but the man beside you was. You looked at him, the same man who once gave you half a crust last winter, now lying flat, eyes open, mouth ajar, fingers grasping at something not there. You wanted to say something, a farewell, a prayer, but your mouth was dry as winter hay and all that came out was air. No one heard, no one needed to. You don't know how long you stood there, only that by the time the sun started to set, the clashing had faded, the screams thinned out, then came groans, then breathing, and finally, silence. Thick silence, clinging to your skin like old sweat. You returned with no trophy, just a torn sleeve and a question rattling around your head. If this is glory, which part of it is mine? No one answered. You stopped asking. Dinner came late that night. Stew, a luxury, but you didn't eat. You stared into your wooden bowl and realized the smell of blood hadn't left, even after washing your hands 3 times. At night, the old soldier snored in the corner. You didn't sleep. Not because of nightmares, but because your ears kept replaying the first scream, like your brain needed to confirm it really happened. You don't remember the pitch, only that it didn't sound like a storybook scream. The next morning, you polished armor, as usual. Your hands trembled, slightly. Enough to leave a streak. Not enough for anyone to notice. Sir Baldwin said nothing. You said nothing. Because no one needed to know what the armor now had to cover up.
Mud doesn't choose who to embrace. It clings to anyone who falls like a damp blanket steeped in rust and old blood, smelling faintly of iron and failure. You're clutching your master's sleeve, trying to drag him out of it, as if hauling a statue buried alive in a bog. The statue, unfortunately, still breathes. Breathes the way someone does when they're trying not to die. You don't know if he's conscious or simply refusing to wake up. You don't call his name, because if he doesn't answer, you're not sure you'd have the strength to keep pulling. And if he does, you wouldn't know what to say. Every time your boots slip in the muck, your heart skips a beat. Each skipped beat curves your back a little more. Your shoulders scream. His armor is thick, heavy, cold like the castle itself had collapsed onto your spine. And you're not much taller than a bread boy. You remember thinking, if only I had a cow. And then you laughed, a dry, brittle thing right in the middle of a battlefield, a place where no one was laughing. No one stopped you to ask what you were doing. Everyone was busy surviving in their own crooked, bleeding way. Someone rolled into a patch of grass, sword still in hand. Another had half an ear, but said something cheerful about soup. Wind slipped through the gaps in the armor. You could hear it, a soft hiss like a sleeping snake. The cold slid into your chest, and each step you took dragged along a fever that hadn't arrived yet. You wondered if everyone trembled like this, or if it was just you being not enough. A sharp noise cracked nearby. You didn't turn your head, not out of courage, but because if you looked back, you might let go. And if you let go, you'd have to face the possibility that he might never get up again. Your fingers found the leather strap and slid across a tear. You remembered sewing that strap yourself 2 weeks ago with kitchen thread, borrowed in secret.
You'd once been proud it held through the fight. Now you wished it had snapped, so the armor would be lighter. You didn't cry, not because you were brave,
but because you were too thirsty. Each time you swallowed, your throat tore a little more. You wanted a sip of water, or maybe sleep. But what you had was a man twice your weight. When you finally pulled him to the edge of the lines, you collapsed. Not quite a fall, more like your body didn't see a reason to remain upright. Your hands, the same ones that once held rags, that once swept manure, were now cut, bleeding and trembling like leaves in winter gusts. You looked at them, surprised they were still attached to your wrists. Someone took Baldwin from your arms. You didn't see who. Your vision had gone foggy from sweat, or perhaps the sky getting drowsy for you. You heard a voice. You all right? But you weren't sure who they meant. And honestly, you didn't know the answer either. That night, you slept beside a dying fire, your back against a tree root. Sir Baldwin was still unconscious, but breathing. You placed your hand on your own chest, just to make sure someone was still alive. The heartbeat was faint, but real. And somehow that felt like the only thing you could trust today. You didn't dream. Just flinched now and then at the clang of phantom steel and the wet sound of a wound you couldn't see. Each time you woke, you looked down at your hands, still trembling. And oddly, that made you feel better. Tomorrow might bring another battle. Or not. No one knew. No one asked. You only knew that the armor would get muddy again. The straps would bite again. And the blood wouldn't leave your fingernails no matter how hard you scrubbed. But tonight, you were alive. And the man you dragged out of the mud, like hauling a dead cow from a ditch, he was breathing too. He might shout at you tomorrow, or he might die. Both seemed perfectly normal. You sat down, hands still trembling, and thought, maybe living one more day is enough to be called loyal. You'd waited for this moment, not because you longed for glory, but because your knees were too tired to keep kneeling for a few more years. You knelt, exactly as instructed, on a stone floor that had been wiped down with a rag you were fairly certain you'd washed yourself. In front of you stood the man you once dragged out of the mud, Sir Baldwin, upright, or at least not collapsing. He wore ceremonial robes, the kind you'd get beaten for touching outside your duties. He seemed taller than yesterday. Could be your bowed head. Could be that your spine had compressed by a vertebra since the last battle. You listened as he recited the oath, slowly, like he was reminding himself. You repeated the words back, not perfectly, but loudly enough that the witnesses assumed you meant it. You swore to protect justice, truth, and the weak, even though you'd never seen any of those survive a full winter. Then he drew his sword, the one that had cut down at least 3 men, and if memory served, 1 chicken. He laid it on your shoulder, not hard, but hard enough that your shoulder twitched. Cold wind slipped down your collar. A bead of sweat traced your spine, though you didn't feel warm. You heard, "I dubbed thee." And then, in your head, a metallic clang, like a hammer hitting a bell no one asked to ring. You were lifted to your feet. You were now Sir. Just 3 letters, but they landed with the weight of a sack of grain you once hauled up to the attic. You weren't taller, not stronger, not wiser. Only now, people expected you to act like you were. You stepped out of the ceremony hall. Someone clapped you on the back, an older knight with wine breath. "Now the real burden begins," he chuckled. You didn't know whether to laugh, so you nodded. Behind you, someone sneezed. In front, a boy wiping the floor.
gave you a glance you'd once given others. You wanted to tell him not to hope too much, but your throat tightened with the weight of the title freshly laid on it. So instead, you walked on. The celebratory feast featured an extra piece of fatty meat and slightly less bone. The wine wasn't better, the bread was still dry. You sat among them, listening to tales of dragon slaying told the same way others talk about killing rats. You laughed at the right moments, because you'd learned how. After the feast, you returned to your room, or rather, the room you'd been assigned. It had a bed, a real one. No bed bugs, or at least not yet. You set your helmet on the shelf. Your arms trembled. It was heavier than it looked. You sat down, pulled off your boots, and your knees cracked in protest. You thought about your new position. No longer a servant, but now a leader. No longer polishing armor, but expected to die for someone else if necessary. Part of you wondered if it was worth it. The other part had already started to drift. You lay on your side, a habit from sleeping on cold kitchen floors. The fireplace flickered red. You stared into it, and for a moment it felt like home. Not because it was warm, but because it asked nothing of you. Just burned, like every fire. You thought about the days ahead, the patrols, the advice you were supposed to give, the fights. You thought about the people waiting for your decisions, even though no one had ever taught you what to do when someone cried. You sighed, a sound quiet enough to echo only in your own head. You closed your eyes. The title of night didn't lull you to sleep, but at least it didn't slap you awake. You saw yourself kneeling again on that first day, scrubbing floors with bare hands. Those hands were still here, now with a few more calluses and a shield. You didn't celebrate. Being a knight didn't taste like you thought. It wasn't salty, wasn't sweet, just tough. Like a piece of dry bread you'd forgotten in your pocket since morning. You didn't get a white horse, you got a scratchy blanket, a stiff mattress, and the snoring of whoever lived above. You whispered thanks. To God, maybe. Or maybe to the older version of you. The one who once wanted to give up, but lacked the courage. You drifted into your first sleep with your new name, Night. It sounded grand, but didn't make your back hurt less, and didn't make your dreams any less ragged. You're standing in the arena, gripping a wooden sword painted silver. It's lighter than a real one, but after 2 minutes of blocking blows, your arm has lost all sensation. Sweat sticks your hair to your forehead. The smell of polished armor mixes with the faint stink of fake metal. Somewhere up in the stands, someone shouts, "Kill him!" with the excitement of a child watching dogs fight over a bone. This probably isn't the glory they sang about. Your opponent is a younger knight, stronger. He smiles like he's used to winning, with 6 front teeth aligned like soldiers. You doubt he's ever fought outside a marketplace where teeth rarely survive long. You clash, both of you, pretending this will somehow make people love you. The clash of swords against shields sounds more like kitchen pans colliding than heroic legend. You slip. Your boots are still damp from this morning's mud. You try to recover, but the ground has other ideas. You fall gracefully. If this were a play, you might get a standing ovation. Instead, the crowd just cheers louder. You're not sure who they're cheering for. Maybe just for gravity. Someone laughs and you feel a piece of dignity tear loose. Not that you had much to begin with. Your opponent offers a hand, as politely as if you were at a dinner party.
You take it, stand, realize your hand is trembling slightly, not from fear, just from absorbing blows with it for the last 5 minutes. You try to smile. Half your face cooperates, the other half is too busy feeling pain. The referee signals, continue. You thought you had a plan. It evaporates the moment your opponent charges like an autumn storm. You swing. Miss, step back, miss again. You manage to block one strike and then feel your feet leave the ground. This time you hit the sand, softer than stone, but much more generous with dust. You open your eyes. Sky. And then a familiar face looking down. The healer. Broken or bruised? You ask. Hard to say, he shrugs, but definitely not intact. He smiles the kind of smile that only professionals and gravediggers wear. You're carried out on a stretcher, a parade no one dreams of joining. The crowd still roars, maybe for the next match, maybe just out of habit. You hear clapping, probably not for you. An old woman covers a child's eyes beside her, a bit late. That night, you lie in the infirmary, a cold room that smells of herbs and ancient sweat. Your ribs feel like someone's practicing drums from the inside. You breathe slowly. Anything more and your lungs show you planets. An old knight walks past. He nods. You're in the profession now. You don't feel proud. You feel numb and thirsty and tired. You mumble thanks for still having teeth to eat soup with. Your lip cracks when you smile, right on cue. Morning comes with a tapping stick on the wall. Another match is starting. Someone else is falling. New cheers now. You put on your coat, leaning like a man twice your age, though you're barely 20. No one notices your limp. They only look at those currently falling. You think about the tournament. It's a machine, grinding men into blood, and blood into tavern tales. Winners are celebrated until their next loss. Losers, if lucky, get a place to lie down or a mention as the guy who got walloped in barroom gossip. You don't hate it, you just know it's part of the cloak you wear now, not for warmth, but to cover bruises and blurred hope. You still wear it, because you don't own another. That night you hold your sword again, this time to clean it. The blade still shines, though your arms are tired. You wipe off the dirt, then realize it's not dirt. It's darker and smells unforgettable. You think about the applause, the fall, the tooth you bit into your tongue, trying not to groan. You wonder, if you hadn't stood back up, then what? No one answers. But there's another kind of answer. A low ache whispering from your cracked shoulder. You smile. Not because it's funny, but because pain has become easier than silence. You thought you were ready. You'd fought in tournaments, taken blows, fallen. You'd heard the stories, glory, honor, songs sung at dawn. But real battlefields don't have music, only groans and the sound of crows beating wings through mist. The first smell is smoke from a village no one remembers the name of. Then comes the metallic sting, not from a forge, but from blood drying on broken armor. And then the flies, never ones to miss a feast. You make it 5 steps before your boot sinks into something soft. You choose not to look. Real battlefields don't look like paintings. There are no clear lines, no heroic shouts, only wet dirt, people running, and the occasional mama from a grown man's throat. You stay near your group, not because of tactics, but because dying alone seems worse. Your sword slips the moment you grip it, slick with sweat you didn't know you had. You breathe hard, and your throat feels like roasted straw. You can't see an enemy, only other armored people also panicking. Everyone looks like you. And for a second, you wonder, if they're all like you, then who are we fighting? Someone screams and charges. You raise your sword, not sure whether to block or just signal that you're also human. Blades clash, then slip. The man scream, not in pain but in terror. You both fall. The ground doesn't care who's right. You crawl up. Mud on your hands. Armor scraped. There's a boot next to your face. It's not going anywhere. You don't look. You're afraid if you do, you'll know the name. Familiarity breaks something inside you, worse than any broken rib. A horn sounds. Someone, somewhere, still believes in commanding chaos. You don't know who's winning. You don't even know what winning means anymore. To take another plot of mud and hunger, you think of last night's cold soup and then feel ashamed that you had time to think. You swing, not knowing who's there. You block, not sure where it came from. You get hit. This time, definitely from behind. You turn. No one. Maybe it was the person in front of you. Sometimes you think war is just a giant game of peekaboo. Whoever blinks first dies. By dusk, you're curled behind a shield as worn out as you are. Each breath is a stone pressed against your ribs. And the smell. Mud and blood and human. The scent of still alive. You wonder if someone, somewhere, is writing a song about you right now. You laugh, and it hurts your stomach. A part of you died today, not your heart, but the part that believed every sacrifice has meaning. You return to camp, dented armor, a limp in your left leg, and lungs that still inflate. That's the part you don't sing about, but never forget. When they ask, were you scared? You smile. Not because you weren't, but because fear had burned itself out hours ago. You say, don't really remember. And that's the truth. Why remember when you have to go back tomorrow? On the way back, you see a patch of trampled grass. You feel like it. Not dead, but not really alive either. You pull your cloak tighter, though you're not cold. The cold is somewhere deeper, beneath the skin, beneath the armor, beneath even the name they gave you. That night, you dream. Not of dragons or castles or ballads. You dream of scrubbing blood off boots and a fly landing gently on your shoulder like an old friend. You wake up, and it's still there. You glance around camp. No horns, no banners. Just the acrid smoke from overcooked porridge and the man next to you dreaming of something worse. You sit up, back creaking like a snapped bowstring. And then you remember. Today, you don't have to go back out. You once thought that becoming a knight would change everything. You imagined a small throne, a polished sword planted in the dirt, and a cup of honey wine by your side. Now you have a wobbly wooden chair, a pile of musty parchment, and a headless goose quill your apprentice insists is still good. And the wine? It's watered grape vinegar. Traditional, which mostly means traditionally bad for your stomach. You are a lord, a word that sounds weighty, like iron armor. But in truth, you're the person who tracks how many eggs went missing from the village every morning. You know the names of every cow, every patch of land, and every time the widow argued with the gardener over the shadow of an apple tree. You used to count arrows, now you count loaves of bread, a promotion of sorts, but you're unsure in which direction. You sit beneath your thatched roof, trying to sketch a map of your holdings on old cowhide. The map is warped, torn at the edge, much like you. You write, Western Field, 3 rows of watercress, feel like you've just slain a dragon, a fat, mouldy one. Your hand trembles, not from fear, but from old tendons complaining. The peasants are many when it's time to collect taxes, but they vanish when it's time to mend roads, patch walls, or search for a lost chicken. You once trained to swing a sword. Now you train not to sigh, at least not audibly, in front of them. You are a lord, and the duty of a lord is to never sigh too loudly. Now and then, nobles from the big city arrive on white horses wearing velvet and perfumed enough to overwhelm the horse stench. They ask, "How are you, good sir?" You smile, the kind of smile you give after someone punches you in the gut and then asks, "That hurt?" You reply, "Your concern is too kind, my lord." Then add to your ledger, hospitality expenses half the harvest. Once, you had to settle a dispute who got to use the well first on the full moon. You sat there, head pounding, eyes twitching, wishing someone would draw a sword and end it quickly. But no, they just shouted with words, and the well water remained untouched. You fined both parties by assigning them to repair the cow pen. Peacetime justice requires creativity. You wear a brown cloak now. Dust clings to the frayed sleeves. Your armor hangs on the wall, like an old joke no one laughs at anymore. Sometimes you look at it the way you'd look at a name you once had. Sir. A word shorter than a sigh. You used to be the one taking orders. Now you give them. But no one listens unless the orders come with bread. You wish you could yell. Not out of anger, just to hear your voice echo. The silence of paperwork makes you miss the clang of steel, why, though even the memory makes you wince, you start to dream, not of glory, but of miswriting a tax entry. You wake up in the dark, searching through ledgers, wondering if you misfiled the salt quotas. And that's when you realize you've become what your younger self once feared, a man who writes carefully, lives cautiously, and inspires no songs. Breakfast is cold porridge, lunch is harvest numbers, dinner is, you forget, you still live, if you can call it that. Each morning, you lift your quill like an axe, not to strike, but to chop time into neat little lines. You used to laugh when someone said, "Books are weapons." You don't laugh anymore. And at night, when the quill is set down, when the door closes and the candle dims, you think that might be peace. But it turns out the loudest noise of all is the one that only exists inside your own head. You used to think of sleep as a reward at the end of the day, like a thin blanket during a cold winter. But you've come to learn, the only thing waiting behind your closed eyelids are sounds that shouldn't be heard again. The clink of metal on bone, the screech of a horse before it drops, someone calling your name for the last time. Every night is the same. You lie on your side, then on your back, then back on your side. The wooden bed creaks in time with your body's twitching memories. Even a light breeze through the thatched roof makes you open your eyes. You're not sure if it's wind or some stray fragment of memory tapping at your door. You can sleep, but not deeply, and never for long. You used to snore. Now you hear your own breathing, soft, shallow, like the smallest whimper of someone hoping not to be found. You sometimes wish you could sleep through the night without seeing the face of the one you didn't save. There's a dream that returns. You stand in a fog holding a sword, unsure of where you are. Someone falls. You run to them, and then you realize it's you. You wake up clutching the blanket, your sweat colder than the real morning dew. You survived. That's what they keep telling you. You're lucky, they say. But no one asks, Are you whole? You used to be the one who acted. Now you sit by the hearth, watching the embers dim, and hope your mind will do the same. Burn out. Go quiet. Once you tried drinking before bed. It made you sleep faster and dream clearer, not an improvement. Sometimes you step outside at night just to smell the air, not because you like it, but to make sure there are no bodies nearby. You've grown so used to the stench of battle, it feels strange to smell only damp grass and horse manure. So you inhale deeply and wait for the scream that doesn't come. You no longer scream in your sleep. You've learned to hold it in, just like you once learned to hold in tears. Back when you were just a trainee. A real soldier, they said, is someone who knows how to stay silent when it hurts. You're not sure what you are anymore. One time, a child in the village asked, "Did you like fighting battles back then, sir?" You looked at him and had no idea how to answer in a way that helped either of you sleep. You smiled and said, "Oh yes." Especially waiting for sunrise. He nodded and understood none of it, which was good. You used to beg the gods for battle. Now you beg them for a night without dreams. The first prayer got answered many times. The second is still in queue. You write in a journal, not to remember, but to forget. But every word becomes a door, every line a mirror, reflecting what fragments of yourself remain. You've forgotten many things, names, dates, titles, but never the sound a young soldier made right before he stopped being a soldier. And that's the part of sleep that frightens you most, not the nightmares, but the memories without names. They don't scream, they just stand there quietly like the shadow at the foot of your bed. You don't remember the last time you fell asleep without curling up, or the last time you dreamed without wind cutting through armor. All you know is, every morning you wake up missing a part of yourself, left behind in the mud, in a scream, or in a name no one says anymore. Your shoulders once held a shield, now they hold a wool blanket whenever the wind shifts. You used to walk upright, perfectly upright, so much so they said you looked like a living spear. Now you lean slightly to the left because your right leg stomps harder than it used to. Your armor's still there, hanging in the corner of your home. Each time you look at it, you wonder, has it shrunk? Or are your bones quietly curling inward like an animal settling into hibernation? No one knows, and honestly, you don't want to. People still greet you by your old title, Sir Knight. But they no longer ask where you're going or where you've been. They just ask, was it really like that back then? And then they listen, nod, smile, as if your stories are just folklore. There are days when you sit in the sun, look out the window, and think of nothing at all. Not because your mind is empty, but because your memories have looped so many times, they've become background music, wordless and worn, like wind slipping through cracked tiles, like footsteps you used to follow. You used to command troops, now you hand out slices of bread to children during feast days. One of them looked at you once and said, "He looks like a statue from church." You laughed and realized that might have been the kindest compliment you'd heard in years. You still tell stories, but you're not sure if they're true anymore. Battles blur together, the fallen stack atop each other in memory. You recall a soldier laughing before dying, or crying, or maybe you laughed. No one's around to fact check.
Sometimes young folk come to ask for advice. You say, "Don't try to be a hero. Try surviving first." And they chuckle, thinking it's a joke. It almost is. Your walking stick taps, thunk thunk with every step, like a tiny drum reminding you you're still moving, even if there's nowhere left to go. Sitting takes a few extra seconds. Standing takes a sigh you pretend not to hear. You don't yawn anymore, you groan softly, then act like you didn't notice. You once wanted to die in a grand battle. Now you just hope not to trip and bash your head on the doorway. No one will write a poem about that kind of death. But at least there won't be blood on the walls. A quiet sort of victory. You were once praised as the glory of your land. Now you're the pause at a party. The man someone points to and says, "He used to be something, right?" You smile, not out of sadness, but because you finally don't have to pretend to be anything anymore. Each time your fingers brush an old scar, a dull chill runs down your spine. Not because it hurts, but because it reminds you that once you were real, and in a world slowly fading like candle smoke, feeling real is rare. You hold on to that like a rusty coin from youth, worn but heavy. No one asks you to lead anymore. They ask if you'll give up your seat. You do, without complaint. Then you watch someone else take that seat as if your spine still lingers in its wood grain. You don't say anything. But wood remembers backs that once leaned against it. And sometimes, when no one's looking, you still put on the old helmet. It doesn't fit, but just enough for you to close your eyes and feel the weight again. Not of burden, but of purpose. A purpose you no longer carry and no longer need. You used to live to fight. Now you live to tell. Or more truthfully, to be asked just once. Was it really like that back then? And if no one asks, you just sit, chin on your hand, and let time do the asking. You sit there, like you do every day, on the wooden chair whose left leg is shorter than the right. The sun no longer catches your armor, it just settles through the awning, warming your wrinkled hands. The other hand rests on a walking stick, once a spear shaft, now something to tap the passing hours whenever your body shifts. You don't speak much anymore. There's no need, and no one's really asking. Children run across the courtyard, playing games about warriors and monsters. They scream, they fall, they swing sticks like swords. You smile, half because you remember, half because you're glad they can laugh without blood being involved. One of them runs past you, then slows. He stops to stare at the faded tapestry on the wall. The frayed edges hang like they're too tired to hold the story. There, a figure stands between a war horse and a pale flag. You know that shape. It was you, or used to be. But the child doesn't know. He points and asks the old librarian, "Who's that?" His voice holds no awe, no reverence, not even curiosity, just a question, loose and ordinary. And you wait, like some forgotten thread, woven into the tapestry itself, waiting to be pulled back into a name. The woman behind the desk looks up. She doesn't look at you, but you hear her soft reply. A knight. Someone important. Once. The child frowns. What's his name? A pause. Not sure, but he once saved the village from raiders. The child nods. Not impressed, not skeptical, just accepting, as if the past is something that can be tidied away in 2 sentences. Then he runs off, chasing the voices of the others. You stay where you are, silent. The wind brushes your shoulder, cold, but not sharp. No one turns back, no one says, "That's him." but something about it feels complete, like the last stitch in a shirt you've been mending your entire life. Not glory, just peace. You once dreamed of your name carved into stone, or at least hummed in a song. In truth, your name's been misspelled 3 times in the tax ledgers. Once, they thought you were dead and crossed you off the roster. You didn't correct them. Maybe being forgotten was easier than being remembered wrong. But that one simple phrase, "He used to be," gave your shadow a little more weight in the chair beneath you. They may not recall your name, but they remember the shape of someone who once helped. Helpful, not heroic. You never needed to be heroic. Lately, you haven't dreamed as much. Or if you do, they come without faces, just the color of smoke and the sound of hooves in mist. You don't wake up startled anymore. You just open your eyes, stare at the ceiling and close them again, like you're rehearsing for something longer than sleep. You were once glory, then a keeper of order, then a storyteller. Now you are a part of the courtyard, the village, the tapestry. A faded hue, but not erased. You exist like an echo, not needing to be sharp, just needing someone to still be listening. And then, one afternoon, a young woman brings her son into the old chapel. The boy looks at the tapestry. This time, he doesn't ask who it is. He says, "I want to ride a horse and protect people like him." The mother smiles. "Then you'll have to study hard." You hear them from your usual spot by the window. You don't turn around. Just lean back against a stone and let out a slow breath. No one calls your name. No one needs to anymore. And for the first time in years, your shoulders don't ache, not because you're healed, but because you've let go. Instead of thinking about what hasn't been told, you simply close your eyes and let the breeze move through your silver hair, like the final note of a very old song. You lived a long life, not glorious, but heavy. Heavy like iron armor, like boots thick with mud, like the look in someone's eyes just before they fell, and you were too far to catch them. No epic ever called your name. No chorus ever sang you away, but you lived, through bruises, dry bread, and sleep that never stayed long enough. You pulled people off battlefields, held your breath when the armor tore, and smiled with cracked ribs. You pledged loyalty, got beaten, got called sir, and kept cleaning up after war under a different title. You survived it all, and sometimes that alone was the triumph. Now you need no weapons. Just a chair pulled close to a stone wall where the evening sun is still warm enough that you don't need a fire. No one comes asking for your training. No one invites you to feasts. But sometimes there's a knock, a child with broken biscuits, or a traveler asking for shelter. You tell stories, not long, not loud, just small crumbs of memory, like the ones left in your lap after a quiet meal. No one remembers every word, but they listen, and maybe that's enough. One night, when the wind stops howling and starts whispering through the door cracks, you close your eyes. No dreams, no fear, no regret. You've walked far enough. From the child left at the castle gate to a name on someone's lips. Even if, just for a moment. In the morning, they find you leaned against the wall like you were resting between shifts. No one cries. Not because they don't care, but because you taught them how to remember without sound. Someone lifts the old iron gauntlet you kept and places it on the chapel table. Not ceremonial, but warm enough. A winter passes. The children still play warriors in the yard. Librarian still gestures at the tapestry. And sometimes someone still asks, "Who was that?" And as long as there's an answer, you're still there, not in the image, but in the telling. Not in the gleam of steel, but in memory. Not to be honored, but to remind. Some people live quietly, but deep, like the foundations of a castle. You were once a knight. Now you are a story. And in this world, sometimes that's enough.